Okay, you lot, so today we are making the long-awaited video, and this will be another tier list. Previously, I have made a tier list for PvE purposes only. That means like various dungeons, all of that, right? Today, we'll be making a tier list for PvP specifically. So this means in arena, both on offense and defense, and we'll be talking about what sort of units work best. Now, I do want to say that I'm gonna try to keep this one slightly shorter than the PvE one, because in the previous one I talked a lot about various different units, right? Because there's a lot of dungeons, I tried to talk about where they work best in each specific dungeon. For this one, because arena is only one thing, right? There's arena offense and arena defense, right? I'm gonna try to keep it shorter. Most likely I'm not gonna provide any like actual game footage, because at this point the game is already released. Everyone knows majority of the unit skills, so I don't exactly need to showcase what they do, right? I'm mostly just gonna talk about the unit, and if needed I will showcase some of their like skills just to elaborate a bit on that point, right? And yeah, for some background, I am currently playing on the Korean server. I have been playing since release, which happened like 7 months ago. For reference, I am currently rank 3 on the Korean server PvP ladder. So yeah, I'd like to say that I have somewhat of an idea of what's happening in PvP, right? And yeah, I'm gonna be talking about every single unit. I'm gonna be talking about various team comps that you can make with them. And yeah, let's get started. Okay, let's start with the first unit on our list, and that will be ARTNIS, right? So with ARTNIS, it's probably not a surprise that she's like the top tier of a PvE unit, right? Because dots are a very consistent thing to use. They are very easy to build around. However, for PvP, right, she was somewhat of a meta unit early on in the game, when there weren't a lot of cleansers, when there weren't a lot of like immunity units and all of that, right? But since then, immunity and cleanses have become pretty plentiful, right? Which means that ARTNIS really fell off in the current meta, and unfortunately I can only see her working in sort of like very early game, which means that unfortunately, if we are looking to push for ranks, right, the only useful thing that she has is the passive, which can reduce the enemy attack bars a tiny bit, but apart from that, honestly, she won't work too well as a damage dealer. She won't work too well as a dotter, because again, there's a lot of counters to dots, right? Her whole kit is built around making sure that dots actually go off, and the moment you have immunity or the moment you have any cleanse on your team, any heal on your team, it's gonna be over, right? Because dots are a slow form of damage. They're not like a massive nuke that happens in a single moment, right? They need a couple of turns to go off, and any healing, any shield, any immunity that you have is gonna be a complete counter to it. So unfortunately, you can make her use in some edgy like specific cases, right? For some like attack bar reduction or something like that, ship damage, but overall she's not gonna do much, so I'm gonna place her in C tier, and also I'm gonna have to rename these real quick. Okay, and next unit we have is BEATRICE. So this one, this unit had its ups and downs, right? But at the moment in the patch 1.5 meta, I will confidently say that she is the most versatile, and she is probably the best DPS unit that you have available, right? So the reason why she is super OP in PvP, and particularly in this sort of like revive/canary meta, is the fact that she is able to self-buff, right? This self-buff makes sure that she is able to sort of like save some space on the units to appear, right? Because if we go to the arena real quick, you'll notice that quite a few teams are starting to run CANARY on their teams, right? And you can see CANARY in both like very defensive teams, and you can see CANARY in sort of these teams which previously were sort of like one-shot teams, but CANARY replaces either a MACHINA or a DIANA in the team as an extra safety. And in these cases, for example, in a team like this, right, if you do remove MACHINA, you're leaving your damage dealer without any buffs. So for units like CHESHA, XEON, all of that, right, they would be struggling in a team like this. But for Beatrice, she does have the ability to self-buff her own attack, which means that she does have the ability to enhance her damage capabilities, which makes her very, very OP. Plus, the cool thing is she also has a very, very cool interaction with CANARY, and because CANARY can revive all of your units, and she revives them at around like 25% of the HP, right? She can sort of combine pretty well with her ultimate, because as you know, with Beatrice's ultimate, the lower HP she is, the more defense she will ignore on the enemies, and at 25% HP, she is gonna be ignoring majority of that defense, which means that the damage you're gonna be doing is absolutely insane. Plus, in the current meta, her passive gets stacked very, very easily. Any Libertas skill is gonna be stacking her passive a lot. Bernice first skill, which is getting a lot of traction in the game again, is gonna be stacking her skills a lot. CANARY first skill is gonna be stacking Beatrice's passive a lot, and once you get a few of those stacks and you have an attack buff, usually the ult is gonna be one-shotting a lot of the enemies, regardless of what their current HP is, regardless of whether they have like defense break or not. And yeah, that makes her a very, very strong unit, and easily I'm gonna say that she is by far the best DPS unit at the moment, and I'm gonna be placing her in S tier. Okay, and the next unit we have is a Bernice. So she recently received a buff to her ultimate skill. Previously her ultimate was only invincibility for 1 turn, and it was much shorter cooldown. However, this time the cooldown has been increased. However, she also gives invincible for 2 turns, which honestly, first of all, pushed her up in the defense meta by a lot, right? Because previously with defenses, if she buffed at the wrong time or she was slightly off speed tuned, she would buff and then the enemy unit would instantly lose the invincibility, making her skill absolutely useless, right? Now, however, because the invincibility is for 2 turns, no matter the speed tuning, right, even if later in the fight, even if you lose a little bit of that speed tuning, she is still going to be able to protect all of your units at least for 1 turn, which makes her a very, very, very strong and scary unit on defense, especially if timed correctly against like a full nuke defense, right? And if we're using her for offense, in a lot of cases, her second skill and her third skills are very, very strong in sort of like a bruiser comp, right? Just to showcase one of the bruiser comps that I use, this is something that I use for more of these tankier teams. And again, I talked about Beatrice. She is a unit that can self-buff, so her alone is enough to wipe out the whole enemy team. And together with her, I use 3 tanky units that can support her, that can make sure that she gets revived, that she prevents getting debuffs and all of that. And Bernice is going to be a very, very strong option in various bruiser teams like this, because first of all, immunity and shield, that already allows you to absorb a lot of damage, that allows you to resist pretty much any debuff that exists in the game. Plus, her passive is extremely strong for comps like this, especially making sure that units like CANARY survive by providing her with a lot of damage reduction. So overall, a very, very decent unit, more so for the bruiser comps, right? But overall, after the recent buff, she is absolutely insane, and I find myself using her quite often, especially in the ever-shifting meta towards more tankier defenses. So yeah, overall, definitely not a unit that you can use everywhere, right? But nonetheless, a very, very strong unit, which I'm gonna give an A rank. Okay, and the next unit we have is SACHA, the dark DPS unit. So this one is I would say, especially in the current meta as well, ever since CANARY came out, one of the scarier DPS units, right? Previously, she was already scary, right? Like, she had a very high multiplier if she attacked first. Combined with her passive, she usually meant that you will get a pretty much guaranteed kill on the enemy, and she does like to focus on the enemy DPS quite a lot, which means that she will be pretty much one-shotting the DPS. Now, that shifted a bit with the release of CANARY, right? Because just one-shotting the enemy is no longer enough, especially if you have CANARY on defense, because she can simply bring it back, right? But the cool thing about her is that her kit also has a little bit more extra counters towards comps like CANARY ones, right? And first of all, if you do one-shot the enemy DPS, you do have a chance to apply silence to the whole team. And if you do land that silence on units like CANARY, that can revive, that can heal up your team, right? You do have the ability to easily follow up on the second turn and kill those units that do revive, with usually the help of LIBERTAS and her second skill, right? Also, in case they do revive, she does have the ability to remove buffs from the enemy. So even if you do revive the enemy DPS, right, she can just kill it with the second skill, as long as she has enough effect hit accuracy to actually strip those buffs, right? So overall, a very strong DPS. I would say not as strong as BEATRICE, right? Because she does have the ability to like fully wipe the team, and you do need to work on all of the units one by one. But overall, much easier to build, because she also has very massive multipliers. You can focus a bit more on speed and still make sure that you are able to kill the enemies. And yeah, overall, very solid unit, right? I'm gonna easily give her A tier for this one as well. Okay, and the next unit we have is Chloe. So probably doesn't need any introduction. I would say this is one of the more popular units in the game, whether you are using her for PvE or PvP. I know a lot of people will use her mostly for PvE. However, I'm happy to say that she is a very strong unit in PvP as well. Now, I do want to mention that she is a bit more similar to BERNICE in the fact that you're gonna want to use Chloe in more of these like bruiser compositions, right? Where you are able to take multiple hits from the enemy, and you're gonna be using her mostly for the passive, right? Because there's a lot of units in PvP that apply a lot of nasty debuffs. I'm talking about units like LIBERTAS, I'm talking about even units like BERNICE with her stun, right? If you do have the ability to resist those with your Chloe, and she is able to move and cleanse these debuffs, you will find yourself improving especially your bruiser compositions by a lot. Plus, on top of that, her second skill and her third skill are amazing healing abilities. Third skill is also able to fully cleanse everything. So if you see yourself having like 2, 3 or more debuffs that you are unable to handle with the passive, you can just fully cleanse them with the ultimate. Usually I try to use her second skill a bit more, because that will give you more overall healing. But if I see that my team is really struggling with a lot of debuffs, I will not hesitate to use the ultimate and just cleanse them all around, right? I showed the team that I use for bruisers. Again, as you can see, Chloe is stable there. I rarely use her heals in this team, right? Because for me, it is important to keep Beatrice on relatively low HP so that she can ignore the defense, right? But if I see myself losing Beatrice, if I see my tank units, especially CANARY, getting low on HP, one Chloe second skill will usually top them up enough to a point where she can continue fighting. So yeah, overall, Chloe, very solid option. Again, more so for these bruiser fights, but a very scary thing to deal with if you are not prepared for it, right? And especially, it is a very good counter to even units like CHESHA. So if you see a CHESHA on defense and you are a little bit scared of that AoE silence, just a simple Chloe being there is gonna be pretty much a hard counter to that. So yeah, easy A tier. sort of like a niche unit, but when she works, she is by far the best at what she does. Okay, and the next unit we have is Diana. Again, doesn't need no introduction. Yeah, this is one of the, like, straight up one of the top tier units in PvP and has been ever since it was released, right? The main reasons are her third skill and the passive, but also the second skill is a very important one for her kit as well. So again, like, probably doesn't need any introduction of what she does. It reduces the mana consumption on all of your units and increases their damage. This is a buff that is relatively hard to come by. I think the only other popular unit that has it is MACHINA's second skill, right? But in order to use that second skill, you do need a very specific comp in PvP, to the point where she needs to first of all use this, then get cleansed from the stun, and only then use this in a lot of cases, which is not going to be possible in PvP. So just having the damage up is going to be like a massive game changer, regardless of what damage you use, right? Because keep in mind, this is not like an attack, this is straight up increased damage, which means it works with attack based dealers, defense based dealers, HP based dealers, all of that. Because I do see some people use units like Monica, for example, and she is a bit more of an HP based dealer, but Diana's damage buff works on everyone equally, which means that she is probably the most versatile damage buffer in PvP that is available, right? Passive, again, amazing. Like, I would say the attack gauge on herself is not as big of a part as the attack gauge on all allies, and even when nerfed by Libertas passive, right, it's still a massive game changer. It is a tool that allows you to cut in between your opponents quite a bit, and if you have a specific team build for it, for example, if you haven't seen the most recent video about XIANG that I've made, I do recommend checking it out, because her and Diana in that specific composition will pretty much counter 99% of the meta defenses that are currently available. So yeah, this allows you to cut in a lot, this saves you a lot of mana, it increases your damage by a lot, and for those longer drawn out fights, if you are able to get a second skill off on a specific unit with a 75% attack gauge, that can pretty much change the pace of the fight pretty much instantly, right? So yeah, easy, I would say S tier for this beast of a unit, right? And next up we have ENAS. So honestly, this unit has a very cool design. I would say an attack based healer, right? An attack based healer that does have the ability to do quite a bit of damage from her passive. It allows your allies to do damage from her passive, but she suffers one very bad thing, right? She is absolutely hard countered by Diana, and the reason she is hard countered by Diana is after she buffs, she gets the extra turn, right? If she didn't get that extra turn, she would honestly be a much stronger unit in PvP, but because she does have that extra turn, this means that if you just wanted to buff up attack, right, you are much better off using units like PLUTO, MACHINA, or even Stein, right? Because if you do buff with her, for example, I would love to buff up and not get that extra turn, because getting that extra turn means that the enemy Diana is gonna be getting an extra stack on her passive, and this increases your risk of getting cut by a lot, right? On top of that, honestly, healing is nice, right? But I have a feeling that attack-based healing doesn't really have too much place in the current meta, right? For example, first skill doesn't do anything, honestly, right? Second skill, it is a good heal, like it's a strong heal, especially if you stack her. I believe she has like an attack-based Rememento, right? So if you stack that Rememento, the healing can be very strong, right? The problem with that is if you do keep getting those additional turns of that, you are gonna get cut. Plus, if you are running her in sort of like a bruiser comp where you are very heavy on buffs, so for example, you're running something like a Diana, PRISCILLA, you're running BERNICE, right? You're basically running a lot of units that stack buffs. her getting that extra turn is gonna actually grieve her by giving her 2 turns and removing all of those defensive buffs. So you have to either have like perfect speed tuning, or you're gonna risk her losing a lot of those defensive buffs and being vulnerable to the enemy attack. So unfortunately, I currently cannot give her any good ranks, right? Like, she's obviously not a D tier unit because she does have useful stuff, right? But mostly that extra turn is gonna be a very big downside for her in the current PvP meta, so I'm gonna place her in C tier. Okay, and next up, FERRANCY, one of the stronger units in PvP, right? I will say that as a unit, right, she is a unit that will fit in pretty much every team, right? But that team has to be able to function as a 3-unit collective, right? What I mean by that is she is a unit that will pretty much allow your team to use more skills. It will allow your team to move faster, right? It will give them attack gauge, but she is a unit that doesn't actually provide anything in terms of like buffs, debuffs per se, damage, or anything like that, which means that she is a unit that will enable the other 3 units by a lot, right? But it will not necessarily contribute to any combo that you can make. So for example, if you are running something like a Diana, Libertas, and something like a CC unit or a damage dealer unit, right? Those 3 units have to work together already, because FERRANCY is only there to give them more mana and to give them more turns, right? She doesn't actually contribute to anything. For example, if we compare it to Diana, right, she also has the ability to reduce mana cost on a lot of skills, right? But she isn't there just for that. She is there to give you attack gauge in order to cut in. She is there to give you an actual damage boost. She is there to sometimes clutch out an extra turn if needed, right? But for FERRANCY, she is there just to make sure that the other 3 units move more and that they are able to use their skills more often, right? She doesn't actually contribute to in any way towards an offensive or a defensive composition. So she is a very good tool to have, right? But you also need to have a team already built to where she can just join in as a 4th unit, as something that allows you to move a bit more often, right? So I hope you're getting what I mean by this, right? She is a unit that helps increasing the strength of your overall team, but that team already has to function pretty well in order for her to work, right? So overall, I would give her an A tier. I know a lot of people would give her an S tier in PvP, right? I personally don't see it, right? Because first of all, there are a lot of other units like Diana, for example, that do function in a similar way but provide a bit more. And on top of that, she does get slightly countered by Libertas because she is a dark element. She can get broken quite easily by Libertas. Second of all of her deductions are gonna be cut in half by Libertas, and I feel like units like Diana are just gonna be a little bit more useful than FERRANCY, but overall a very strong unit. I'm gonna give her A tier. Okay, next up we have HAJIN. This guy honestly has a lot of potential with a 3rd skill. I tested him out quite a while ago, right? And it is a pretty cool niche ability. However, he suffers from one thing, and that is his base speed is just slightly too low, right? If the base speed was something comparable to Libertas, I could see him maybe working as like a budget Libertas option, right? Where he is able to prevent tier 3 skills from being used, but overall very low base speed compared to Libertas. I think he's like 5 speed lower, and even after the recent buffs, honestly, he just doesn't do much, right? Even if he did use this as a 1st turn, right, a lot of meta units already have very strong 2nd skills, and let's say he used this against a damage dealer like CHESHA, right, that does not provide me any confidence, because CHESHA's 2nd skill can still be a very scary thing to deal with, right? So yeah, overall it's like a budget Libertas, but one that is not going to be able to outspeed anyone. and honestly has a very difficult time in this meta. So yeah, unfortunately I don't see him being used at all at the moment, at least, and it's gonna go into the lowest tier. Okay, and next up we have the craziest lady in the game, and that is ISANIA. So for this one, this is a pretty cool and a pretty unique unit, I would say, right? First of all, I want to say that on defense, very bad AI, right? Because she always uses her ultimate, and the ultimate only gets a bonus turn if you do get a kill, which means that if you build a tanky enough team to where you can sustain a hit from her ultimate, you are gonna have the easiest time in dealing with her, because her ultimate, unfortunately, it doesn't have a very high multiplier compared to a lot of like better options like XEON, like BEATRICE, even in some cases like CHESHA, right? It doesn't have like that same level of threat. So on defense, I wouldn't recommend using her in a lot of cases, right? Unless you are trying to compete speed for speed, right? But if you are going with this into a tanky team, she is gonna crumble instantly. But on offense, she is a very good tool, I would say, specifically for players who are a little bit more early game and who are still not up to par with a lot of the top players. And the reason for that is with her second skill, right? Once you skill it up, you do have a 50% chance to proc an additional turn. She was skilled up for me before. I did have her, I believe, ultimate and her second skill skilled up, but we did get a reset for all of the skill ups, and I ended up never skilling her up further because she simply just fell off the meta a bit. But yeah, with this you have a 50% chance to proc an additional turn. I believe there is one Rememento that also gives you an extra 10% chance to proc an additional turn as well. I'm not exactly sure which one it is, but I know there is an attack artifact that allows you to get like that extra turn. Yeah, I'm not sure which is at the moment, but I know there is one, right? So you can bump that chance up to 60%. And the cool thing about this skill is that if you do use the second skill and you proc, right, you are sort of relying on RNG, right? You are relying on a 50 to 60% chance RNG. However, if you do win that RNG, you have a very high chance that you will be able to win the fight, even if your equipment is somewhat lacking, right? Because, for example, if you want to have big DPS with XIANG, you do need to have good equipment. You do have to have good setup with it. If you want to have big DPS with SACHA, again, you need to have a relatively good equipment. You need to have high speed. If you want to have good damage with BEATRICE, same thing. You need very high level runes. For ISANIA, because she is able to just use the skill twice, even if your equipment is somewhat of a lower tier, right? You use this, you get an RNG, and in a lot of cases with a second hit, unless you are fighting a super tanky team, you will just have so much damage multiplier with two of these skills that in a lot of cases you will be able to wipe at least the enemy DPS unit and secure the win that way. So yeah, she is a bit of an RNG unit. She is a bit of a unit that I would highly recommend using a bit more early game to mid game, right? But she definitely falls off once you go into those later game fights where you want to make sure that you are landing consistent damage and that you are consistently winning against your opponents. Overall, I would give her between like a solid B and A tier. But for now, right, because she does have that ability to like win, straight up win with like a 50% chance, I am gonna place her in A tier, but as time moves on, I probably will move her closer to like a B tier. Okay, and next up we have Ivy. So I already made a video about her in terms of PvE. She is an amazing unit, and mostly because of her second skill and the ability to completely lock down bosses. But for PvP, she is a bit of a different story, right? So if you are using her on offense, you can make her work with her ultimate quite a bit, right? But especially in cases where you are able to cut into the enemy team. Like for example, the team is fully buffed up, but your Libertas cut in and you are able to follow up with something like Ivy in there. In those cases, especially if she gets the ability to strip buffs away from the enemy, she can do some pretty good damage, and in a lot of cases will one-shot the enemy DPS even without any buffs on her, right? But the problem comes after that, and that is once you have used her ultimate, she doesn't exactly have much left in her kit, right? Her first skill, it can reduce buff duration by 1 turn, which honestly doesn't do much, right? Plus the chance, I think, is around 70% when skilled up, so even that is unreliable. Second skill, you can absorb attack bars, but then again, you are absorbing attack bar from 1 unit, so at most you are gonna want sort of like fully disable 1 unit, but even then it's only 75% chance, and in boss fights you can alleviate that by giving a lot of attack bar boost to her with units like Diana and Stein. But in PvP, you simply, if you miss that absorb, that could be a matter of losing the fight and winning the fight, right? So she is able to fully shut down 1 unit in PvP, but after that she really lacks a follow-up that you could compare to something like CHESHA, right? Where her second skill is able to very much still kill a unit and also have additional effects like stripping, right? For her, she simply doesn't have that. The one upside that she does have is if the enemy moves first, she can survive the hit, right? Depending on how much Libertas hit, because if Libertas hits for a lot, even the passive might not help you out, right? So yeah, overall, decent unit for shutting down one of the enemy units with the ultimate, but after that I feel like she just doesn't have enough follow-up, and I'm gonna personally place her in around B. She's sort of like a niche category that will only work in certain scenarios. Okay, and the next unit we have is Jeremiah. This one I'm gonna keep it short. Absolutely useless in PvP, right? As you know, Kana is another daughter, and she mostly needs ARTNIS in order to work with her. The problem with that is because ARTNIS herself isn't exactly great there, she won't be able to benefit a lot from the explosion, right? Because for the explosion, you usually want to run ARTNIS with her, and in a lot of cases, you will have a very, very difficult time running ARTNIS in PvP, so even benefiting from this dot explosion is not going to be a useful thing, right? First and second skills, again, both deal with dots. Second skill is a random enemy hit, so it is a very bad skill into when you have like 2 or more enemies. So again, this one does nothing. First skill, pretty useless, right? This is very much a boss type unit, a very PvE type unit. And unfortunately, she just doesn't do anything in PvP, straight to D tier. Okay, next up we have KANA. So this one, again, I would say this is like a very, very niche unit for PvP, right? The only uses I can see for her is sort of like her ultimate can somewhat shut down an enemy like damage based team, because if you do manage to land an ultimate on them before they attack, right? Reduces attack, increase miss chance, right? There is a good chance that it will disable their DPS by quite a bit. The problem with that is, in order for her to move, because her stats are pretty low, like 106 speed is absolutely dreadful, which means that she does need to have very, very high speed build, and she needs to have another unit to help her out, such as like Libertas or Diana that would move first, right, in order to enable her moving. Yeah, at that point you are just better off running like a regular DPS unit instead of her, right? Like I would much rather run something like XEON, something like CHESHA, or something like BEATRICE and just straight up kill the enemies instead of trying to disable their damage potential and then relying on them like RNGing their way into the victory in order for this to work. So yeah, this is a decent option if you want to sort of like gamble a bit and try to disable the enemies, but in a lot of cases where you'd want to disable enemies and these enemies will be quite squishy already, you're just better off using a proper DPS and just one-shotting them, right? So overall, I wouldn't say this is an amazing unit. Because of the self-built healing, right, she can clutch out scenarios such as like if she is left against one unit or maybe two units that don't have any healing, she can clutch out a fight, right? But apart from that, I don't see her working that well. So yeah, very, very niche use. So I'm gonna place her in C tier because she definitely does something, right? She can do something, but it's just not very meta at the moment. Okay, and next up we have XIANG, and this one is probably one of my newer discoveries. If you haven't seen the previous video, again, I think it's the one before this one. I simply replaced one of my buffers with XIANG. I built her on a massive effect hit rate resistance. If you look at her kit, she currently has 137 resistance plus 60 from her passive. That built-in passive resistance allows her to completely counter any XIANG attack bar reduction that she does, and with a single sleep she can pretty much win you the fight, right? I do want to mention that the stat requirements for a good XIANG are gonna be absolutely insane, right? Because look at this, you need massive speed, you need massive effect hit, and you need absolutely massive effect hit resistance for it to work, right? Much higher stat requirements than units like LIBERTAS when compared in terms of like gear strength, right? But once she works, trust me, she is absolutely a game changer, right? The problem with that is that she will only work in sort of like these specific comps where you have to shut down the enemy Libertas and their DPS. But the moment you fight any other team, such as like if there is a Canary in there, or if you're fighting a bruiser team, she suddenly becomes very useless, right? Also, because she is a water unit, she's not a neutral unit, so if you are fighting any wind type of units, she is gonna be pretty useless in there as well. And I have seen a lot of units like BERNICE, Diana has always been there, right? Diana, BERNICE, and even units like Monica slowly pop up on the leaderboards, and I'm not sure if I will see any here, but yeah, I have been experimenting a bit with the higher ranks. I'm not sure if I can find anyone running her at the moment, but yeah, I have seen more and more Monicas come up on defenses, and honestly, yeah, like you can see here, she will have very difficult time CCing a lot of the wind units. And unfortunately, because the current meta does have quite a few wind units in there, particularly units like Diana, BERNICE, and Monica, she will have a lot of trouble working into a lot of those comps, right? So she needs a very specific enemy team to counter them. But if you do find teams that she can work against, specifically teams like this, right? Like we are talking Libertas, the usual Libertas, Machina, all of this, like all of the bottom 5 ones, she would be able to easily counter with just a single sleep. She will be a very strong unit into comps like that. So not quite S tier yet, I would say, but she is definitely getting there. I'm gonna place her in A tier. Okay, and the next unit we have Libertas, probably no questions asked. I'm not gonna talk too much about her. Highest possible speed, high effect hit rate, passive absolutely broken, right? Counters pretty much all of the meta units like Diana, like what's it called, PRISCILLA, right? Like Machina. So absolutely hard counter to a lot of those units by just reducing their attack gauge in half. And if you land this, right, it's GG. Your whole team is gonna be able to follow up with the rest of their kits. It's not that difficult to follow up, honestly. If you use units like Machina, if you use units like FERRANCY, right, they will give even more extra attack gauge gain, and your DPS can be actually relatively slow and still follow up. I believe with speed like this, with my Libertas, I was still able to easily follow up with most of the combos. So yeah, the requirements for the rest of the team, once you land, the reduction with your Libertas is not that high. But yeah, honestly, higher speed, if you move first and you land this, you pretty much instantly win. No questions asked, straight to S tier. Again, the next unit we have is LILIA. So this one, honestly, unfortunately, a bit of an unpopular unit both in PvE and PvP, right? She was being used for a brief moment before. She does have a pretty cool third skill, right? It does allow her to revive all of her units on the field, very similar to CANARY, right? The problem with that is her revive is just a revive, right? Compared to units like CANARY, where she revives, she gives invincibility, she gives effect resistance up, right? Those units have a lot of protection. For her revive, it's just a revive, right? Basically, you revive and they can be instantly killed already, so you need to have like perfect follow-up with a unit like Diana, for example, in order to instantly boost their skills with the second skill, right? It used to work with units like BEATRICE, again for the same reason that her ultimate allows you to ignore defense, right? So she did work both with her revive and this, right? Because immortality essentially drops her HP to 1, which is the perfect scenario for BEATRICE, right? But at the moment there's quite a few strips in the arena, and if you just encounter units like LIBERTAS, right, with the first skill she can strip that buff and instantly kill you. Even a XEON can just steal that buff and instantly kill you. So yeah, unfortunately not that great into the current meta. CANARY is pretty much like a direct upgrade to her, so she does have some niche use, which is why I'm gonna place her in C, but overall I wouldn't recommend building her. Okay, and next up we have Lucas. So, he did have a little bit of a glow up in PvE content, right? Specifically this more difficult content where you can defense break and do massive damage to a lot of bosses as long as you keep them locked down with units like Ivy, right? But unfortunately, for this guy to do anything, right, he needs to have the enemy's guards consistently broken. The problem with that in PvP is, first of all, you're gonna be fighting a mix of different elements, right? Which means that you will have a pretty difficult time breaking guards on these. And on top of that, even if you do break a guard, the enemies can just take another turn and easily restore their guard, which means that in a lot of cases it will be very, very, very difficult to time his ultimate to a broken enemy guard, which unfortunately it just requires way too much setup and is way too easily countered by a lot of the units, even like Rampart or PRISCILLA, to a point where he's just not reliable at all. And yeah, unfortunately still going to D tier for PvP. Okay, and next up we have MACHINA. So this was one of the New York units, and it is pretty much a direct upgrade in terms of raw DPS to PLUTO, right? So PLUTO was a unit that helps you out more with crit rate, but if you are someone who is a bit later game and you are able to make sure that your DPS units have like 90 plus critical rate, MACHINA is gonna be a much better option. First of all, she buffs crit damage, which means your overall damage is actually going much higher. Plus, on top of that, she does give attack gauge both with her ultimate and her passive, which allows her DPS to be even slower and still follow up quite easily. For the first and second skills, honestly, in PvP, those don't really matter, because usually once you buff with her third skill, you will be able to wipe the whole enemy team with your DPS, right? But if you do get to a point where you can use these, you can eventually drop a little second skill here and there, right? And still increase the damage on you. But yeah, mostly you're gonna be just using her for the third skill. First and second skills are something you don't really need to worry about in PvP. But yeah, when it comes to buffing damage, because of the inbuilt attack gauge boosting on her third skill and the ultimate, she is by far the top tier option in PvP, not matched by any other unit, and easily goes into the S tier. Okay, and next up we have the MC. So there is one thing that I really don't like about the MC, and that is the fact that this is a unit that has probably the most difficult to obtain skill ups in the game. because you are not able to summon this unit, you will not be able to summon any of the dupes that you get for her, right? Which means that you either have to buy universal dupes or you have to summon them with not summon, but buy them from the dupe shop, right? Prestige shop or whatever you call it. These are the dupes for the MC, and unfortunately, just that fact alone already nerfs a lot of her skills by a lot, because this is such a high investment unit that in a lot of cases it will simply not be worth it. Plus, on top of that, her skills are unfortunately a little bit lackluster and all over the place. As you can see, first skill, she has a very small chance to absorb attack gauge, which in PvP is not gonna exactly be a great skill. Second skill, attack all enemies, 40% chance to freeze. If you skill that up, it goes up to 70%. Nice bug, by the way. Up to 70% chance, which again, if you are relying on that freeze to win the fight, you're better off relying on a much higher percentage skills like XIANG, for example, with a 90% chance. 70 is simply just not reliable enough in my opinion. And her ultimate, again, AoE attack, I believe it's 80% chance to freeze for 2 turns, right? But even then, once you use the skill, right, if the enemy cleanser does not get CC, for example, if you don't CC the enemy Chloe, she uses her ultimate once, GG. Right, absolutely fully counter the unit, and without the freeze being there, she will simply not be able to do much. Plus, on top of that, she does have the ability to ignore some defense when the enemy is frozen, right? But you have to freeze her first for that to ignore, and because this happens at the same time, from what I've tested at least, right? I did test it like a few months ago. But yeah, essentially, back then at least, the freeze happened at the same time as the damage, which means that you wouldn't actually ignore any defense unless you first froze with her first skill, or I mean second skill, or with other units like Rampart, for example, right? And only then followed up with MC. So even then, like, if you look at it, first of all, super high investment. Second of all, a lot of like conditions just to land that freeze on the enemy, right? And only then benefit from the damage. And even then, it's only 50% ignore. If you look at units like Beatrice, right, she can ignore up to 100% defense and needs way less setup and is able to self-buff herself. So yeah, there's just a lot of conditions to make it work, and in PvP you simply don't have the luxury to make that happen in a lot of cases. So unfortunately, does have its use, but a very niche one, and I'm gonna place it in C tier. Okay, and next up we have everyone's least favorite DPS unit, and that is Monica. She has been sort of a unit that always has been there, right? Because she is, again, similar to Beatrice, right? She is a DPS unit that somewhat works without any buffers, right? Because she has scaling with her max HP as well, and there isn't exactly a buff that does boost your max HP, right? She usually didn't need any additional damage buffers to maximize on her damage, right? As you can see, the attack multiplier on the ultimate and on other skills is relatively low, so even if you do have an attack buff, the damage increase will be very minimal, right? And a lot of that damage mostly relied on the max HP that you had. So that means that she is a DPS unit that is able to work without a lot of additional setup needed, which is the reason why you see it sometimes in PvP, right? I'm not sure if I'm gonna fight it, but yeah, I did show one of the guys, I believe this guy, right? Yeah, you can use her in some DPS scenarios where you are not able to fit in another DPS and you're not able to fit in a buffer for that DPS, for example. But her overall damage is gonna be somewhat lower compared to a proper attack-based DPS with an attack buff, right? Like her damage is, she is, I would say, more of like a bruiser type damage dealer. She is definitely a damage dealer that will work, right? Especially once you let some turns happen, right? If you're on like turn 70 or something like that, the damage buffs increased quite a bit, and in those cases you are able to pretty much one-shot the enemy DPS, right? In the bruiser fights that I do with this team, for example, once we get to like turn 50, the enemy Monica is able to one-shot my Beatrice without any buffs, right? So it can work from time to time, but if you're looking for a unit to do damage only, right, if you are able to keep that unit safe, for example, like Beatrice in my team right here, you are better off using a lot of other DPS units, such as Beatrice, such as XEON, such as SACHA, right? So overall, a decent option if you are struggling with space in your team, but overall definitely not gonna be like the top tier DPS out there. I would say B tier for now. Okay, and next up we have Pluto. So just as I was talking about Machina, she's pretty much like a sort of like early game version of Machina. The problem with her is she was super popular before, right? But the problem with that is her use, she does buff attack, right? The problem is there are some units that do gain attack gauges from the enemies moving, such as Diana, such as Priscilla, right? And unfortunately, compared to Machina, she doesn't have any sort of like an additional attack gauge boost or anything like that, right? Which means that yes, for early, for mid game, she will be a massive boost towards your damage in a regular like nuke comp in arena. But once you get to those later levels, right, if you are using it against units that do have attack gauge boosting, not having any additional boost on your end can just end up leaving you a little bit vulnerable to getting cut by the enemy team, right? The only exception, of course, if your team is perfectly speed tuned. For example, if you move first, if your Libertas cuts and the rest of your team is high enough speed to follow up, because in a lot of cases when you're using Pluto, you're gonna also be using something like Libertas Diana, right? The problem with that is both Pluto and Diana do not have any ability to boost attack gauge, right? Which means that after you use your Libertas attack gauge reduction, your DPS needs to have high enough speed to where it will follow up last and avoid getting cut after the enemy gets boosted by the passive 2 times, right? So this means that your DPS will need to be very high attack speed if you want to use something like Pluto, right, compared to something like Machina. But in those cases it will work out, right? But again, it just increases the stats that you need on your team, right? So overall, good buffer, right? Definitely a solid buffer in terms of boosting your damage. For second skills, again, in PvP won't matter much because in a lot of cases the fight is over, at least the important fight is over within the first nuke of your DPS. So just the third skill in a lot of cases should be enough to pretty much secure the win. But it just unnecessarily requires much higher stats compared to units like Machina. So yeah, good unit. I would place her in B. In previous patches before Machina was released, I would probably place her in A or S tier, but for now, unfortunately, she's only gonna have to go into something like B tier. Okay, next up we have a Priscilla. So this was a very strong meta unit back when she released. After that, we sort of got Libertas in there, and she lost a lot of her use because she did have very good skill set. Like she did got guard damage immunity, and she did have regular immunity for 3 turns, which meant that you are pretty much immune to any debuffs that the enemies do. Plus shield and damage taken. This was an insane skill in order to absorb damage. This was a very good unit to use with units like Beatrice, because the enemies would drop a big AoE nuke, but because of that second skill, a lot of your DPS units like Beatrice would easily survive that hit, and would be able to follow up with an ultimate of their own. Unfortunately, when Libertas released, she lost a lot of her use because at that point her passive sort of got cut in half. Immunity didn't matter because attack gauge reduction goes all the way through immunity, so this doesn't even prevent it. And yeah, she sort of like fell off because in a lot of cases, once you use the Libertas, you are gonna be able to easily nuke the rest of the team, and if she doesn't move, she is not able to boost this, and she's not able to unfortunately sustain the attack. She was a pretty cool unit with units like XEON, right? Because XEON does get a lot of extra damage if he has a shield on himself, right? Plus, because she did give a lot of buffs, it did boost his ultimate. So in a lot of cases, if you just buffed her second skill, the enemy, or rather your own XEON, would still be able to easily nuke the whole enemy team, right? But yeah, unfortunately, Libertas release sort of ruined her a bit. She is making a bit of a comeback right now, right? If we look at the arena teams, let me see if I can find any in there. But yeah, she is making a bit of a comeback in these sort of like bruiser comps. So basically, PRISCILLA, CANARY, usually BERNICE, and then a DPS unit, right? In these cases, she does allow a lot of safety in there. What I am missing a bit from these is a healer in a lot of cases, right? Because usually you can just chip damage them away and quite easily win against it. I personally prefer something like this, where you have a healer there instead of PRISCILLA, right? But for some people, they do run PRISCILLA in there instead. And she is making a bit of a comeback in there, right? She's still a very solid unit when used on offense personally, right? Especially if you are able to win and somehow counter that Libertas that the enemies have. But yeah, I'm gonna place her in A tier. I still see quite some use in her, and I think she is making a bit of a comeback with a CANARY being released. So yeah, for now, I'll say A tier. Okay, and next up, we have a RAMPART. So this guy, how can I say this? He has a very strong kit, but he has a very big drawback as well, and that is his stats. If you look at the base speed of his what's it called, of his kit, right, he unfortunately doesn't have any sort of way to gain any additional speed, and he is left at 93 speed at the moment, right? When compared to units like when compared to more of these like PvP based units which rock around 130 speed in their kits, his kit would be a very good kit for sort of like a stall defense, right? You do see him from time to time in a lot of these stall defense. I think even the like rank 1 or rank 2 guy is running him, if I'm not correct. But yeah, he has an amazing first skill. It does have a pretty high chance to freeze enemies. You do have a shield, guard immunity, defense buff, right? You do have a passive that gives you shield every turn, which is pretty much like a whole the Memento that you can get, right? Like a very similar to the Memento here. But that base speed is what really throws him back, because yes, you do have an amazing kit, right? Yes, you can build him relatively fast with just speed from equipment, right? But even then, he will be moving way less than a lot of the meta PvP units, and he would work pretty well in teams like this, right? Like as a replacement to something like BERNICE, or as a replacement to PRISCILLA, right? He is sort of these mostly used for a lot of these like stall team compositions. The problem with him is that, again, like speed is so low to a point where he will just move way less often than a lot of the meta units. And honestly, when you're moving way less, right, with units like, for example, BERNICE, again, she also has pretty low base speed, right? If you look at BERNICE, it's obviously higher, but it is pretty low, right? 95 speed. But even when not moving, BERNICE does have her use, right? She still has a passive that allows her to reduce a lot of the damage. So even if she doesn't move a lot, she still has her use, right? Like units like this, units like RAVI, they still have their use even if they're just standing there. For Rampart, unfortunately, he does need to consistently move because he doesn't exactly have any other use if he is just standing there, right? And he does need to consistently move in order to use a lot of his skills. So yeah, overall, good stall unit, right? You can definitely make it work in some offense comps as well. Mostly gonna be comps where you're going towards like 150 turns to maybe 200 turns, and at that point you can actually just one-shot units with your first skill and stuff like that. But overall, very sort of like niche. I wouldn't place him in C tier. I think he has more use, especially his kit is relatively decent for PvP, so I would put him somewhere around B tier. Okay, next up we have RAVI. So I'll say it as it is right now, right? I will say when Real-Time Arena comes out, I think this will be the strongest unit in the game. Her kit just has so much different stuff going that I feel like as an individual unit, she's gonna be like one of the best, right? Max HP scaling, basic attack. Honestly, pretty massive damage on a first kill, plus a very good chance to land defense break. Then you have self-regen and taunt, right? Then you have massive shield buffs, massive defense buff, healing increase, right? You have massive damage reduction, very similar to a BERNICE, right? She has a lot going in her kit, but that's also a bit of a drawback because she has a lot, but she doesn't really specialize in one area, right? If you wanted just a defense break, right, you would use a unit like LIBERTAS, for example. If you just wanted a taunt, right, in a lot of cases you can use units like THEODORE, right, which are, in my opinion, a bit more of a consistent. If you wanted just buffs, right, like defense buffs, shields, all of that, I would use units like BERNICE personally, right? She does a lot. She does a lot of different stuff, but she doesn't do anything the best, right? Which is a bit of a drawback in the current PvP meta, and this is the reason why you don't see her a lot, right? You definitely still see her from time to time, but she definitely won't be a very popular unit in the current meta. She would work in teams like this, right? She will work best in a lot of these stall teams because honestly, once you go up in turns, like when you reach like turn 100 and higher, that first skill does have the potential to do a lot of damage, right? But I mean, unless you build like a team around her, she simply is gonna be a bit lost, right? Her AI is all over the place. You never know, like for example, with a unit like LIBERTAS, right? All of her 3 skills hit the enemy's AoE, do some sort of like debuffs, effects like that, right? No matter what she uses, you always know what will happen. You will hit the enemies, you'll hit them AoE, and you'll do some kind of a debuff, right? With Ravi, you never know what she will do, right? She might buff up her ultimate, she might defense break and damage enemies, she might taunt the enemy team while they have a full team-wide immunity, right? You can just never rely on her to do something. Like for example, BERNICE, I always know that she will usually do some sort of like a defensive option, whether it's first skill that stuns or whether it is a second skill that buffs up immunity, right? Both of those are going to be an option that will shut down the enemy a bit. With Ravi, it's also a bit all over the place, right? So until a Real-Time Arena comes around, I feel like she just sort of like struggles finding a place in the meta. But overall, the kit is absolutely loaded, right? So when under perfect conditions, I will say like this, right? She can be one of the best units in the game, but at the moment she is a little bit of a random kit that just has a little bit of a struggle finding a place. I'm gonna place her in A tier, right? But I feel like once Real-Time Arena comes out, I'm gonna be moving her to S tier. But yeah, for now, A tier. Okay, next up, ROUSSIN. I don't know how to pronounce that name. This guy was super meta, I think, in like the first season of PvP, right? His ultimate was absolutely massive, but ever since a lot of more cleansers, a lot more healers, a lot more immunity units came out, he lost his use a bit, right? He's used mostly for the ultimate, right? It is essentially a full buff strip and a debuff that does not allow you to apply any buffs at all. So if you are looking for a stripper that can completely shut down the enemy team in terms of like buffing, right, he is by far the best option you have for that. The problem with him is if the enemy has any sort of cleanse, if he has any sort of like healing or sustain, this guy will struggle a lot against it, right? Because once he uses his ultimate, right, once he drops this, his other skills aren't exactly that great, right? Like he can increase miss rate, which is a very powerful debuff, but then again, if you do have any sort of like cleanse, if you're running like a bruiser comp, which usually does deal with buffs, this will not do much because those bruiser comps are not exactly scared of this debuff, right? You do have increased damage taken, but this one is only single target, so again, very niche in terms of what you can use it for. So this skill, it's a decent skill, right? Like it's a decent skill to shut down a lot of like the new comps that have to deal with something like Diana, Machina, and all of that, right? So it's a good counter to some of the meta teams. The problem with him is, yes, he can strip, right? But it's not exactly a hard CC effect. Like this, it will remove buffs, it will do some damage, it will prevent you from doing further buffs on you. But it's not exactly a CC effect. Like even if I do get hit, and I do see him from time to time in the current meta as well. I think we've seen one of the comps with him. I think one of the... Wait, is it not the top dude that has him? I think one of the like... Okay, wait, that's me. Let me see. I think... Was it like rank 5, rank 6? The guy that had Monica, I think, had him as well, right? Yeah. He can somewhat like help you out in there. The problem is you either have to have a proper follow-up that will instantly kill the enemy team while they don't have buffs. Because if you don't kill, right, like let's say if this team does not kill me and I have Beatrice on my offense, right, I don't really need buffs on her. Just her being low HP is gonna be able to wipe the enemy team, right? Yeah, as you can see, I used my tanky team against this guy. And yeah, I mean, yes, he will strip my team, right? Yes, Monica will do like 50% of my enemy or of my like team's HP. But again, like I have a cleanse, I have backup, right? As soon as that buff is, or rather that debuff is over, I'm gonna be fully healed up, fully buffed up the next turn. And after that, he has to wait 4 turns in order to do anything, because none of his debuffs will be landing, none of that, right? So yeah, overall, he is a decent unit if you can make him work, but he does very much need a team built around him in order to make a proper follow-up. Otherwise, you won't be able to do much. So yeah, pretty neutral unit, pretty decent unit. I'll give it a B here. Again, the next 2 units I'm actually gonna speed run because they're again not exactly great, right? So SACHA, she is an amazing, probably one of the best single target DPS units in the game when it comes to PvE, right? Because she did recently get a, or so I thought. I think she should have gotten a buff to her passive, but it looks like either the translation is not updated because it should be 3 stacks of 24%. It says 14 5 stacks. I don't know. Maybe they pulled back on it. But yeah, she has absolutely massive damage. However, that damage is only good in PvE. In PvP, she will not be able to do anything, right? Even the stealth mechanic, which is very OP. At that point, why stack your stealth for like 3-4 turns when you can just straight up do the same damage with SACHA's ultimate and be done with it, right? So yeah, unfortunately, SACHA, no place in the current meta at all, D tier, and going straight to SERIE. Again, this one is a PvE unit, right? She is mostly there for her passive healing, right? So essentially she is able to heal you by just using a basic attack or basically like any skill. But apart from that, all she does is healing, right? Yes, she does have a cleanse on her second skill, but it's only one cleanse for 2 mana. At that point, if you're looking for cleanse, right, this is the option that you want, right? You don't exactly want to use CD for cleanse, and in a lot of scenarios where you do need healing, you don't need a unit that just heals, right? You need a unit that does more. And unfortunately for her, she just heals, right? So yeah, unfortunately PvP does not need just healers, so yeah, for now she's going to D tier. And next up we have SHUTEIN. So this one, again, for those who are interested in PvE, probably one of the best units in the game in terms of use, but for PvP, unfortunately she is a bit too slow. And I don't mean slow in terms of speed, right? Her speed is more than enough, right? What I mean by slow is that in order to be useful, she needs to take 2-3 turns minimum, right? She needs to, first of all, like for example, as a buffer, right? If we're comparing her to something like PLUTO, we're comparing to something like MACHINA, she needs to use this skill, and then she needs to follow up with her first skill to be useful, right? She's not a unit that is useful just by buffing, because if you're looking just for a buff, PLUTO and MACHINA are much better, right? If you are looking to buff up and then boost attack gauge, right, that's something that MACHINA does. For SHUTEIN, that takes 2 turns, right, because she needs to ult and then she needs to move again and use her second skill. So unfortunately, if you want her as a buffer, she's unfortunately someone who does need to take multiple turns, which is not really a possibility in a lot of PvP scenarios, so she doesn't exactly work too well in there. First skill, not that great in PvP. Second skill is pretty good. However, again, you do need to move more often. And if you do need her, not for the attack defense buff, but just for this, you're better off just using Diana's second skill. It's a much bigger boost. It also reduces the cooldown of the ally ultimate skills, right? So at that point, you're better off using much better units. Mana, cool thing, but then again, in a lot of PvP cases, the match is over within the first few turns, and if they are not, you do already have ways to cycle that mana with units like Diana, units like CANARY or FERRANCY, right? So yeah, in a lot of cases, amazing unit in PvE, but unfortunately a little bit too lackluster in terms of more stacked skill effects in PvP. Still definitely usable in some comps. I would say early game she will work just fine, but yeah, for higher level PvP, I can only bring her up to B tier. Next up we have THEODORE. So this one actually not a bad unit overall in my opinion. When it comes to PvP, right, first skill, second skill, passive, all of these are useless, right? When it comes to PvP, only the third skill is kind of useful, right? I do want to say he is a defense scaling unit, and if you do give him defense buff from some sort of a source, he can do pretty good damage with this skill, right? But mostly what you're looking for is the taunt on all enemies, right? This is essentially like if you are choosing to deal with the enemies via a CC route instead of just a straight damage route, he is a very good option, right? Of course, there are better options in my opinion. I think units like XIANG are gonna be a little bit better with her sleep because it's for 2 turns, it has a higher activation chance, right? And it does have similar multiplier. But he is a pretty good budget option, and I did use him quite a bit, right? Especially if you feel like your DPS is not able to follow up right after your Libertas, for example. Instead of having another like damage buffer or something like that, you could just use THEODORE, use the skill, and buy yourself one more extra turn for the rest of your team, right? So yeah, he's a pretty good option. I still like him, right? He does suffer a bit against bruiser comps, right? Because if there is a cleanser, if the enemies have higher resistance, if there is like just a Chloe on the enemy team, he will get hard countered. But overall, into a lot of these like one-shot new comps, he will work pretty well. I will give him like a B tier for now. Okay, and next up we have XEON, so our light main DPS unit, and honestly, as time went by, at first he was by far like the strongest DPS unit in the game, right? He does have very high multipliers if you are able to stack it, right? And you do have a lot of options to stack it, so he has very high multiplier. He gets up to 60% extra multiply if you get up to 5 buffs on him, which with time is getting easier and easier. Plus he does have a lot of extra damage if you have a shield, right? So there's a lot of ways to stack it, right? First of all, his signature, the Memento, will just give him shield, which is already proccing both one buff from here and the passive, right? A lot of the meta units that you use will be able to do that as well. Diana third skill, that's 2 buffs. Machina buff on top, that's another 2 buffs, right? We also have a new shield set, right? For those who are not aware, there is a new Taijira dungeon, and this set will give you a set of shield on your whole team, and each set actually counts as a separate shield buff, which means that essentially if you build like 3 of your units on that set, that's already 3 buffs for XEON as well. So yeah, stacking this ultimate isn't that difficult anymore. However, here's the deal, he is just a damage dealer. First of all, he is gonna be, I would say, by far the best damage dealer if you move first, right? But the moment you are not moving first, you will encounter issues where you are getting outsped, you are getting CC'd, your buffs are getting stripped, maybe one of your units died and they're no longer able to buff up, right? Or maybe they got CC'd and you're not able to get all of those buffs going. He really relies on your team moving first or being able to like fully buff up, and if you're not able to fully buff up, his damage is gonna drop significantly. Plus, after he uses his ultimate, honestly, I would say he doesn't have much, right? Yes, he is able to do decent damage, steal buffs, immunity, he will get a little bit of shield from his passive, but overall, that is nothing compared to units that have way more going in the kits. For example, CHESHA, she is able to like block heal, she is able to strip and easily kill with even higher multipliers, right? So overall, very good turn 1 unit, but the moment you get outsped, his use is gonna fall off quite a bit. So overall, very good DPS option. I would place him A tier. Definitely lower than Beatrice in terms of the current meta, in my opinion, but yeah, A tier, still a pretty good choice, right? Okay, and we're approaching our last 2 units. So Yuri, again, this one, 4-star unit. This unit, unfortunately, is not great in PvP, right? This is a very PvE focused unit. In PvE, she does amazing damage. She is able to break guards consistently. Unfortunately, in PvP, that is actually a bad thing, because first of all, similar scenario to how I talked about ENAS, right? She does have a bonus turn in her kit, right? Which means that yes, she will be able to do her ultimate plus, for example, first or second skill follow-up. She will be able to kill one enemy unit, right? But after that, she lost all of her buffs. She is sitting there without any safety at all, and she is so squishy that she's probably gonna die from a single hit from like LIBERTAS or something like that, right? So yeah, unfortunately, not much use in PvP. She simply just, her own kit counters her a bit too much, and unfortunately, I'm gonna have to place her in a D tier. Okay, and the last unit we have, in the newest unit that did came out at this batch, and that is CANARY. So this unit is definitely changing the meta. I'll say it like this. You can see it quite a few defenses, right? So with her, I found that there's 2 types of teams that people build with her. There is the bruiser type, which is something like this, where you see a damage dealer, but sometimes not even a damage dealer, something like a LIBERTAS sometimes works, right? You see CANARY, you usually see BERNICE, and then you see some sort of another sustain option, so like Chloe, PRISCILLA, Diana, stuff like that, right? So these are sort of like a bruiser slash tank comps, right? And these sort of rely on you not being able to kill them fast enough to a point where their DPS would wipe you out. So using like a regular Libertas one-shot comp into this can be a bit scary because you never know how tanky they are. They might have the new shield set which just simply will not allow you to kill them, right? But you are able to easily kill them with a bruiser comp of your own, right? And then another type is them just placing CANARY in the regular Libertas new comp, right? So usually this would either replace Diana or the attack buffer, right? So in this case, for example, you can see this CANARY most likely replace something like a MACHINA, right? You can see that it's basically like a regular new comp, right? But instead of having the attack buffer, they do have a CANARY in there. Again, you can see one here, you can see one here, right? Like very similar setup to just a regular new comp. The way that works is if you do have a new comp of your own, they are sort of relying on you killing everyone except CANARY, right? And if you don't manage to kill CANARY of your own, they will be able to just revive the whole comp, and in a lot of cases you may not be able to follow up with a secondary nuke to wipe her out, right? Now the problem with CANARY is her AI on defense, for example. Her AI is relatively dumb. She will use her ultimate the first thing that she can, as long as she has mana, right? So as long as you let them move first, right, you can easily counter CANARY by just letting her use the ultimate and then killing her after, right? Plus, unfortunately, she doesn't exactly have much safety of her own, right? Like, she doesn't exactly have any, like, damage reduction for herself, right? She does have damage reduction for her allies, right? But she doesn't have any reduction for her own. That's why people usually pair her with something like BERNICE in order to make sure that she survives. Plus, even if you build her on a relatively tanky build, honestly, this is what I have, right? I cannot say that this is like the tankiest build that I can, because it is a speed set after all, right? Even then, she does die to a lot of like one-shot comps. So you have to either have her super tanky, or you need to have like one or two of the new shield sets to make it work. And at that point, like, you're sacrificing a lot of stats, you're building a specific team around that just for her to use her revive. So overall, I would say she is a unit that definitely can introduce a lot more units. And for example, for me, right, she made my bruiser comp work, because at this point, like, without her, I would have a very difficult time protecting my Beatrice, right? But in this case, even if my Beatrice dies, I'm not exactly scared of it, right? Because I know that I will just be able to revive it with CANARY, whether it's right after, whether it's after 3 turns, doesn't matter. I know that there is a chance for me to bring my Beatrice back. And as soon as I bring my Beatrice back, if I buff up my ultimate with Bernice, for example, I will be able to just build up the attack and ult with her right after and wipe the whole enemy team. So yeah, she did enable quite a few different bruiser comps. She is slowly changing the speed comp meta a bit. And yeah, overall, I can't say that she's S tier yet, but she definitely deserves the A spot in the tier list. So yeah, that's pretty much my final tier list, I would say. Keep in mind, this is PvP only based. This is not for PvE at all. So S tier, Diana, Beatrice, Libertas, MACHINA. I feel like these are the 4 units that are by far the strongest. And honestly, now that you look at it, if you just build a comp with 4 of these, you will be just fine, right? A tier, a lot of very popular units that I will highly recommend using as well. B tier, somewhat niche, but will do pretty well in a lot of different team comps. C tier, very niche comps or rather very niche units that require specific comps built around them to work. And D tier, honestly, I wouldn't even look at them in terms of PvP. So yeah, hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you agree or disagree with certain picks of this tier list. And yeah, that's about it. Looking forward to the release of the new units in, what, like 2 weeks from now. And yeah, peace.